right, we are here today on July 18th, 2014 in New Jersey with Robert Hayes. My first question for you is to please say your name and to spell it.
Robert, R-O-B-E-R-T-E, Hayes, H-A-Y-E-S.
Can you tell me a little bit about when and where you were born and grew up?
I was born in Illinois, in Wilmington, Illinois, in that area. And I was born on a farm. My folks farmed there at that time. In 1926, I was born. You know, on October 4th, 1926 is my birthday. Every kid grew up working on a farm, and we were on that farm for about 20 years. And when they're about 20 years old, my dad gave it up, and we moved into the city. And that was a change of life for us, for the good for us. He wasn't too happy, but it was good for us, the kids. So we got along on that basis, yes.
What kind of an education did you receive growing up?
What kind of an education did I get growing up? Well, first of all, I finished high school, then I got drafted into the Army, and I came out and I did that, and I worked a couple of years, and then I went back to college. And I went to Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois. And I graduated from there, I can't remember the year now, sometime in the 1900s here. Yeah.
So, when were you drafted into the military in World War II?
When I was 18, yeah.
What year was that?
1945.
So it was towards the end of the war?
Right toward the end of the war, yes, yes.
Do you remember when Pearl Harbor happened or any other major events in the war before you were drafted?
No, I was in the Army about, it was early 45 I went in, and the war was still on. And the war didn't end until about 6 months. Then when the war ended, then we were shipped down somewhere else, you know. I wasn't sent overseas at that time. But I went overseas later, and that was about where it was. That's basically. I was in the islands.
Did you go through basic training?
Basic training, yes. Yes.
Do you remember where that was at?
Where the hell was that? That was Camp Hood, Texas. Mm-hmm. I remember it well. Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Mm-hmm. Well, Camp Hood, Texas was a new camp for training infantry people. And I mean, they gave you the works. I was 18, and I think I must have lost, I don't know, 30 pounds while I was in Camp Hood, Texas, 3 months. Because I was there for about 4 months, I guess. And I went home. My mother barely didn't know me. So the heat just took all the meat off of you, practically. You know. And then after that, I went back, and I had the opportunity to go to the Air Force, and I did quickly. Got out of the infantry, and I went to the Air Force. And then I worked as a mechanic in the Air Force on a B-29 crew. That was what it was then. And that was just as the war was ending there.
And what do you remember what base that
I
was
was
at?
never overseas during the war, no. Because I was young. I was born in 1926, and I was just like 20 years old at that time, yeah.
Where did you work on the B-29s?
On the B-29s, Roswell, New Mexico.
So what kind of mechanical work were you doing?
That was the mechanical work. I was an engine mechanic. And after I was broken in, I got assigned one engine on that plane. And that engine better be running right, or I was in trouble. I didn't go back to them. When I worked with my supervisor, he was good, yeah. So we never had trouble.
Were you impressed by the B-29s? Was it a good plane?
Oh, it was quite an airplane. Certainly was. Yes, I had many rides on it because they always made a point of taking the mechanics up on the airplane with them. So if they weren't going to do the job right, they were going to be part of it.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what you remember about the airplane and the work you did?
The airplane? Well, the airplane was B-29 was a new aircraft right at the end of the war. And it was a big craft. And it could carry quite a bomb load. And it was used in Japan quite a bit at the end of the war. And I guess I was in the war probably about 6 months when the war ended. So I had about 6 months of service time during the war. And then I had to stay another 18 months. I stayed 2 years in the Air Force. Yeah.
Do you remember when you heard that the atomic bombs had been dropped on Japan?
I heard it when everybody else did, because they never let that out.
So was everyone relieved, or what?
Well, everyone was quite relieved because they figured that was going to be the end, and it sure was, because they didn't. After they got 2 of them, no more. They dropped one, I think, 1 week, and they dropped one the next week, and they said, it's over. We're quit.
So when did you get sent to the Pacific then?
Well, I was in the Pacific when that happened. Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah.
when the bombs were dropped,
yes.
you were already
I was on Kwajalein.
Okay.
Yes.
So were people on Kwajalein worried that they might have to invade Japan?
Oh yes. Well, we were. That's where we were set up for.
You were getting set up.
We were going to invade Japan, and if they hadn't quit, we'd have been in there.
So
yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit
That's
about
right.
what the preparation was at the time for the invasion?
Sure. We were doing all of it. Well, I was a mechanic on an aircraft, so I was like an infantryman when it was. But the infantry was really preparing to go into Japan. And where the hell was I? I was in the middle of the Pacific on one of those islands. Right now I can't remember all the names of those islands, but basically that's where it was. And they would have invaded Japan if they had stopped, and they knew that. No, they were told that specifically, and they didn't want any more. After they saw that atomic bomb, that was the end.
So all the infantry
Yep.
must have been very relieved then.
That was right. Well, I think there were 2 bombs dropped, I remember. And after the second one, it was over. The war ended just like that. And the war had ended in Europe, now you got to remember, in May. And this went on until like in the fall. And that's when they quit. Yeah.
So were you on Iwo Jima? Do you remember being on Iwo Jima?
I landed on Iwo Jima, but I didn't stay there. No, I was on Kwajalein. Kwajalein, yeah.
Were you trained in any kind of combat?
No, I did not have any kind of combat. No.
Were you trained how to use a flamethrower?
Oh, sure.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, a flamethrower is a wicked animal. You had to be careful with a flamethrower because you had to know which way the wind was blowing. Because if you fired a flamethrower into the wind, you might get roasted. And that was the thing they trained you with.
So why did they train you with a flamethrower?
Well, that was one of the jobs I had.
Was that in case you ever saw combat or for the invasion?
Hmm?
Was that for in case you saw combat or
Well,
for
no,
the invasion?
what they did, they gave us that combat training because they wanted everybody to have that combat training. And even though I was an aircraft mechanic, I had to take that training.
Were you ever afraid that you might have to go into combat, or did you?
Well, sure, I didn't know. How the hell do we know? We didn't know how long that war was going to end. I had a brother that was over in Italy, and he did 50 missions over in Europe, and he came back, and then they sent him to the Pacific, and he was in Hawaii getting ready to go on and bomb Japan when the war ended.
Oh, wow.
He was a pilot, yeah.
So you
I
both
couldn't be a
ended,
pilot because I had a bad eye.
but you both
They said
ended,
you got a good right eye when they took me in the Army, that's all.
but you both ended up working in the Air Force or on
Yes,
planes.
yes, yes. I was a mechanic on an aircraft, yes. I don't claim to be anything else.
How did they train you to work on the plane engines?
Plane engine? Well, I had was mostly on-job training. They just assigned me to another mechanic. I didn't go to any of the schools or that kind of thing they had. They did have schools for the mechanics, but they were needing guys so bad they just put guys in. And I grew up on a farm, and I knew how to take tractors apart and do that kind of stuff, so it's kind of natural for me. Yeah.
Did you work on a whole bunch of different planes, or were you
No,
devoted to
just
one
on
or
one
two?
aircraft.
Just the,
One aircraft.
Do you remember the name of the plane?
Oh, no, I don't. I do remember the name of our squadron. Our squadron commander was the Enola Gay, and that was Paul Tibbets, and that was his mother's maiden name.
Did you ever meet Paul Tibbets?
Oh, yes. Yes, I did meet him. He'd come around to us. He would come around to each crew, maybe every month, and kind of talk to the guys a little bit, shake hands, and he was a great guy. He was.
So were you on Tinian
Yes.
Island?
Yes.
That was where you were, Tinian Island?
Yes, I was in 45. I was in 45 when I was over there.
Okay. Do you remember anything about Tinian Island?
Tinian?
Tinian.
Very little. Just another island out there. Yeah.
It was very hot, I assume.
Yeah, very hot. Yes, very hot. Nothing much to do other than hang around the barracks and do that stuff, and that was it. The food was pretty good. They took care of our food. I'll say that for them, and they fed us good, and we had no complaints on the food. At least I didn't. Some guys would complain about anything, but I had no problem with the food.
Did you meet any Japanese prisoners of war at any point?
I had nothing to do with any of the prisoners of war. Yeah.
Did you ever see any of them?
I saw some of them coming in, but they were put in a separate area. Mm-hmm. And that was about it, yeah. But I was not on that plane. I was a mechanic on an airplane, and they wanted me working on an airplane rather than watching prisoners. Yeah.
Was there a lot to do on the engines? Did you have to
Oh,
work on them?
yes, every day you had to maintain that engine.
So what does that mean? Oil or wires?
Well, you had to, first of all, they gave you a list of what had to be done. And you did that every day. You checkpointed it every day on that plane. We each had a toolkit they gave us, and we had to take care of that. We carried that with us, and we took it back with us, and we carried it back to the line. Yes.
So how many hours per day did you spend
Well,
working on the engines?
it depended, but sometimes you'd get up there early in the morning and go out there, and it was so hot that you would quit about 9:30 or 10 o'clock. And then you'd go back, and you'd go back about 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the sun was starting to go down. And then we worked till like 6:30 or 7 at night, and then we'd go and have dinner. That's the way it was.
So it was a really big job to maintain the engines.
Yes. They gave us good consideration. I couldn't complain about the Army at all. No, the Air Force. So when I went in, I was drafted into the infantry, and I knew what that was because I had about 6 months of training in the infantry first. Then I was transferred to the Air Force because I had certain mechanical skills they wanted.
And you were happy to get out of the
Oh, I
infantry.
was happy to get out of that. Yes, I was happy to get out of that. Very happy.
How did you feel when you found out you were going to be sent to the Pacific?
Hey, you had to go somewhere. You had to go put your 2 years in there or whatever it was. Then they didn't know because the war was still going on. See, when the war ended, then you knew when you could look forward to getting out. But I went and I got out, I think the end of 1946, somewhere in there, yeah.
So the island that you were on during the war,
Yes.
there were a lot of B-29s there?
There were a good number of them. There was, Kwajalein was a B-29 base, yes.
Any crashes when planes were taking off or coming back?
I don't recall that we ever had one. I don't think we did. Not there. But because the fighting ended, and then we lost some planes when they were fighting, you know. But some crews were lost, but that was it. But then when the war ended, then you know, it was just, they were policing Japan. They were doing.
Were you really proud of your particular plane that you worked on?
Well, sure. Sure. You worked. You liked it. You liked to be sure that it was what you were doing was right.
Were you friendly with the pilots and the people who flew the plane?
Yeah. Well, they came around. They checked on what you were doing. They were there. Now you have to say they did a good job. And if you weren't doing it right, they told you. You know. And I didn't have a problem with that because I had a pretty good mechanical inclination. But some guys that didn't notice, yeah, a bolt from a screw, you know, they just put them in there. They had to be handled carefully. That was life in the Air Force.
So when the war ended, you stayed on Kwajalein the rest of the time you were in the
Yes.
Army?
Yes.
So what kind of work were you doing after the war ended?
After the war ended, I stayed there and I was helping them fix up planes and doing this. I was working on aircraft.
Did you still have one dedicated aircraft, or was it a more general upkeep after that?
Well, basically, after the war ended, the older guys got out. So then we had to replace them, see, what they were doing. And so I had to stay in the full 2 years, which I did and got out then.
So did you feel like, did you get busier than when the war ended because you had to take over some of the other work the other people had been doing?
Oh yes, sure. And we understood that because we were younger, you know. I was like 18 years old when I got drafted. And, you know, I'd been in, say, 2 years when the war ended. And, but there's some guys that had been in there 4 and 5 years, you know. And so they went home first. That's the way it was.
But you were okay with staying out on Kwajalein
I
longer?
had no problem. No problem with that.
Did you like being
I
in
mean,
the Pacific?
I had a brother was a pilot, and he had bombed Europe he had done 52 missions over Europe, and then they were getting ready to send. He was in Hawaii, getting ready to go bomb Japan when the war ended. They were going to make him go. They had him go back, and they actually got him as far as Hawaii, and then he was going to go down to one of the other islands on the base, and then start bombing Japan. And so I thought after all his missions he did in Europe, he had to go and do that. But then the war ended. He went back home, and they got married before I even got home.
So he must have been very relieved then when the war ended and he didn't
Oh,
have
yes.
to go to Japan.
I'm very happy. They were all happy.
What kind of a plane did he fly?
What kind of a plane did he fly? He flew with the B-17.
B-7.
Yeah, that's what it was. That was the big plane in there during World War II.
Was a B-29 bigger or smaller?
The B-29 was later. It came in later during the war. It was used mostly in the Pacific. Yeah.
Which was bigger, the B-29 or the B-17?
The B-17 was an excellent aircraft, and but it didn't have the distance that the B-29 did. And the B-29 was built for the Pacific, and the B-17s were built to bomb Europe. That's what it was, basically, because the war was first of all in Europe before we get into the Japanese. See, then we get that then, you know, the distance in the Pacific was just miles and miles, you know. And in Europe, you could base the planes there, and they could make the raids. That's what they did.
A lot of historians think
Yes.
that the America's planes were really one of the decisive factors in the war. What do you think? Do you think planes were really important?
Yes. Well, the planes were, as far as I could see, the way we maintained them, they were a good aircraft. You know, it just depended how you maintained the planes, and that's what it boiled down to.
Do you have any stories that you remember specifically about you or your coworker?
No,
your
I don't
colleagues?
have any stories because I wasn't in long enough during the war, from that standpoint, and I don't have any stories that I would relate to anybody about what I ever did or whatever got involved in. Because I got involved at the right time as far as I was concerned. Because I didn't have to get exposed to a lot of what they did, you know. I was on Kwajalein for about 6 months, longer after the war. Because I went in, I was younger, I went in later. Yeah.
So
And I had to do 2 years.
So can you tell me about then what you did on Kwajalein after the war was over? You said that you had to help take over
Well,
some of the older
we
people.
maintained a certain strength and a certain airbase there. They wanted to keep a certain number of planes there. 'Cause they didn't want somebody to start a war over there again till they got the Japs under control. Well, we were living in Japanese barracks, and the Japanese had been in there. There were Japanese barracks, and then we took the island away from the Japanese, so we moved into the Japanese barracks. You know, and they weren't bad. They cleaned them all up. You know, the army went in and redid them and did that, and that's where I was on Kwajalein. Yeah. I had no complaints. Now some guys would complain about anything, but you know, yeah, you're in a war. You're in a war. That's what it is.
Did you help maintain any of the planes that were involved in nuclear testing?
You know what?
Did you help maintain the planes that were involved in nuclear testing?
Yes, you sure. We had to keep those planes ready to go anytime. They never knew when it was going to flare up again either. Yeah.
What were some of the most serious challenges that you and your colleagues faced in maintaining the planes?
And maintaining a plane? Well, the weather was one big problem. In the Pacific, you know, you got storms. And you could get a storm, and a storm could last 2 or 3 days. And you couldn't work on the plane. So when you went back out there, you had a lot of work to do. And that's the way it was.
Because the water would get into the engines, or?
Well, sure, but it didn't bother the engines so much, but you had certain things that you had to do in that plane daily. And when the weather was real bad, they said, leave it sit. And you'd go back out and you'd do whatever you had to do.
So you would just have to work harder or longer than
That's
after
right,
that.
harder and longer, yeah. But everybody, the guys I was with, they all accepted that. We knew that was the game plan. And then the thing ended, and then everybody was saying, well, when am I going to get out of here? Well, it took a while. I went to Kwajalein just about the time the war ended, about 3 months before the war ended. And we were getting prepared for, you know, the Japanese thing. And that's the way it was.
And then when the war ended, how much longer were you on Kwajalein for?
About 5 months.
And from after 5 months, did you get sent somewhere else?
5 months, then I came back. Yeah.
Okay.
And eventually I spent 2 years and I got out.
So what else did you do in the Army after the war ended?
Well, you did the same thing. You maintained the planes, maintained the aircraft.
What about the nuclear tests? Was that during when you were on Kwajalein, or was that later?
Well, that was done. That was done. The nuclear thing was later. Yeah, right after. When I was on Kwajalein, let me think now. No, I think. What did they do? They dropped one or two on Japan.
They dropped a
Can't
couple
remember.
on Japan, and then
Yeah,
then
yeah.
and then
Yeah.
later in '46 they had the bikini tests.
Bikini, yeah.
Were you there? Did you see that?
Well, a bikini, yes. I saw the bikini thing, yeah. Yes.
Do you remember the mushroom cloud and how big it was?
Well, yeah, it was big.
Did you come into contact with any other key military figures at the time?
No, not really. I was only a, I was down the ranks as a corporal.
So you met Colonel Paul Tibbets, but was he about the highest rank that you met?
Oh, yes. Yes, Paul Tibbets was our commander. And he would come around and he would talk to us. He was a decent guy, very decent guy.
Did you know that he had been involved with dropping the bombs?
Well, sure I do. He was in charge of the place.
Did you see the Enola Gay?
Hmm?
Did you see the Enola Gay?
Oh, sure. Enola Gay was right on our island. That was his mother's name. Yeah. So I don't know. That's a lot of past history.
So what did you end up studying in college after the war was
College?
over?
Well, what I did, I got up. I came back, and I decided what I was going to do, and I decided to go back to school. And I did, and what I did, and I majored in business administration. That's what I did. And I got out, and I went to work for a company, and I went into the personnel administration and that type thing, and that was my career.
Did any of the skills that you learned in the military affect your life later on?
Not really. I would say not really. But you know, it was nice to have been there and done that, and you could talk about it a little bit, but that was about it. Patriotism always played a certain part, but it wasn't an over-ending part, I don't think. No, for anybody, you know, really. Yeah, we wanted everything to go right. That was the main thing.
So when you were sent to the Pacific, it was still, no one knew how the war was going to end at this point. You didn't know that there was an atomic bomb.
No,
When did you find out about the bomb? When it was dropped on Japan?
God, I was in one of the islands when I heard about it. I can't recall which one. It was in the Pacific. I think it was Tinian, I think. But when we heard that that bomb had been dropped on Japan, we knew that it wasn't going to last very long, and it didn't.
And so when you were in the Pacific, did you make friends with a lot of the other soldiers?
Well, and you made friends with the people you were working with, sure. And you got along with the people you worked with. I never had a problem getting along with anybody. Well, there were some people who were a little difficult to take, but you just rolled with the bunches.
What did people do in their spare time to relax? Did you
Yes.
play games or what?
Oh yeah, you could play baseball and do that kind of thing. They had activities for you. They gave you baseballs and bats and that stuff and place to play. And they took care of the guys pretty good.
Did you have a position in baseball that you liked to play?
Nah, not particularly. Not particularly. I used to play first base mostly. That's about it. Well, you could always go to the beach. There's always water. We'd go swim. We'd go swim too in the water. It was okay. Yeah, it was okay. And hot, you know. And you'd go in about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That thing.
Were,
Go take a dip. Then go and get washed up, get a shower. 'Cause you're in salt water. See? Yeah, that's the only thing about that. So if you went in the ocean, you're in salt water. You had to go get a dip so you get cleaned up. So we always did that anyway. Now, certain things we did, you know. And they had a little club on the island there. You could go to non-commissioned officer club type thing. Yeah, it was fine. I never had a problem.
so were the beaches very pretty over there?
Oh yes, some of the beaches were nice. They were nice islands, and it was always warm. and cooled down at night, but it was warm in the daytime. And I had skin that I couldn't, well, just see my arms here now. They are, this I don't know what happened to, but I got burned somewhat on my arms. That was the way it was.
Were there any wildlife on the islands?
Any what?
Any animals or
No.
that you saw?
No.
Was there any remnants of the Japanese, like any
No,
guns
I never saw
or
anything,
anything
no.
that you saw? Did
No,
people have to
no,
be careful
they were
about?
chased out of there long before. Yeah.
So you didn't have to worry about any
No,
mines or
no.
bombs?
I was on any big islands. Some of the big islands, they found some of them hiding, but not on the small islands. Small islands, they cleaned them right off of there. Yeah, before they took them. Yeah.
How did you come to be involved in Operation Crossroads?
Crossroads? I have no idea. I was just one of the guys who was selected.
Did you do airplane maintenance for that as well?
Yeah, that's what I did. I did airplane maintenance. And that was about it.
You showed me your great yearbook that you have from
Yeah.
Operation Crossroads. Where did they send that to you afterwards?
They did afterwards, yes. Yes, they did. I got that about a year later.
It seemed like they took a lot of photographs.
Yes, they did, yes.
Do you remember there being a lot of people with cameras during that?
I don't know. I don't know how they did that. I never questioned the thing they did, yeah.
When you were on Kwajalein, was there a lot of emphasis on secrecy or not?
Not secrecy so much. We were there was a bomb, it was a bomber base, and that they were using it to bomb the Japanese. And that was it. And they make raids and go out sometimes. Yeah. That was it. But I did my time and came home. Thank God. I got home about the end of 1946. Somewhere in there, yeah.
Were you relieved to be home after being in the Pacific for so long?
No, didn't bother me. I stayed there, and the time I had to stay, and just stayed there, you know. And what are you going to do?
When you got home, was there anything that felt strange to do, like, sleeping in a bed again?
No.
So you transitioned
No,
pretty.
I never paid a lot of attention to that. And nothing. No, the bugs weren't too bad. No. At night it was cool. Nice and cool at night. You got a nice cool breeze. And in the daytime it was hot. And I burned, so I had to be careful. And when I worked in the aircraft, I had a big hat.
So when you were working on the aircraft, did you have what kind of?
Well, we didn't work on the aircraft till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We would work on the aircraft from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon until about dark, which was probably about somewhere around 8 o'clock. And then we didn't work in that hot part of the day. That was because you put your hand on the plane, it'd burn you practically. Yeah.
What kind of a uniform did you wear when you were on Kwajalein? Did they have you in fatigues?
Just the old military. Pair of tan pants and a khaki shirt. That's what it was. I never wore shorts because my legs got burned, so I never paid much attention to that. Some guys wore shorts, yeah. They were allowed to if they wanted to, yeah. On the line, but not in the mess hall. If you went to the mess hall, you had to be just, they didn't tolerate that in the mess hall, yeah. And it was good. And there had to be certain rules that had to be followed, and they were followed. And I never had a problem.
Like what kinds of rules do you remember? Were there any that other people had problems with?
Well, sure, yeah, sure. You knew you had to be at work at a certain time, and you had to do certain things in the aircraft, and they were scheduled. And they'd come around and they'd check to see that you had done those. Yeah. If you didn't do them, you were in trouble. You might get away with it once, but you wouldn't get away with it twice.
And you never got in trouble?
I never got in trouble, no, never had any trouble.
Did you like your commanding officers?
I had no problem with them, no.
Did
They'd
you,
come around and talk to us and, shake hands, and maybe once a week or so, and that's it. And the guy we were working with as the supervisor, he was the one that we were really working with. Senior mechanic. He was really in charge of the mechanic for the upkeep of the aircraft. And I was just a mechanic on the group, see.
were there any parts of working on the engine that you particularly liked doing? Any of the maintenance that you liked especially?
Well, yeah, there were parts of the engine that you could do, and there were parts of the engine you couldn't do, that it took a specialist to do. And they had them, and they'd come out and do what they had to do. Or you say, hey, you got to come out and you got to change this thing. Well, that is not working. And they do it. So that's the way it worked.
Was there ever trouble getting any supplies?
I didn't see any trouble. No. We didn't see. We had plenty of supplies. We had plenty of food. It was not bad. I hear a lot of guys complaining. Those guys will complain about anything,
Tell her about what you saw when they did the test bombs. You rode in the plane with them because you were a mechanic,
Yeah.
and you said that they were taking photographs. You have
Yeah.
some of them.
Well, I didn't. I didn't have any camera.
You didn't take the pictures, but there were photography people on the plane.
Yeah.
And you saw the big explosion when
Well,
the
we
bomb.
saw the explosion, yeah.
Yeah, so just
Sure,
describe that a little bit.
You could see that. Well, that's just, it blew that big bomb.
Were you scared at all that
No, I was far away from it, several miles.
was there a big light?
Sure.
And was it very loud?
Well, it was a loud pop, yeah. But they told us it was going to happen, and look out there and you'll see it. I wasn't on the plane during the test. I went up there the night after the test, the evening of the test, and I got right up there. There were trees all blown over on the one island there that had no trees left, and that thing wasn't. But the radiation was pretty good, but they didn't stay very long. When the Geiger counter got up, he'd pull out and go away. Yeah, that's what it was.
And so did they just take you up so you could see it, or were you there for part of your work?
No, I was on the ground crew, and so they took me along if I wanted to go for a ride. And I told the pilot ahead of time, and he said, yes, you can go. So I'd go up there in the evening, seeing they were taking the pictures, and do that. But they didn't stay in there very long. Just went out again. Never bothered me. Not to this day. Anyway.
So you didn't see the clouds, the mushroom clouds?
Oh, we saw it in the morning, but that was from the other island. You could see it from miles away, yes. Sure. But, yeah, just another thing in the service, that's all.